Here we are at the Metal Voice show once again with Chris Tsangarides, a famous producer.
We're talking about Anvil, we're talking about Judas Priest, we're talking about Thin Lizzy, we're talking about Tragically Hip, we're talking about Concrete Blonde, we're talking about
Tigers of Pantang.
We're talking about every artist known to mankind.
Chris, welcome to the show.
Hey, nice to be here, guys. Thank you.
Let's start off right off the bat with the news.
Okay, go ahead.
All right, so Steve Grimmett, lead singer of Grim Reaper, lost his leg in Ecuador while on tour. It was amputated. And there's this Metal Reaper All-Star team, spearheaded by Tony Dolan at Venom Inc. And Chris has been kind enough to produce these songs. So Chris, maybe a statement to Steve Grimmett. I know we were supposed to have you on when we spoke to Steve in Ecuador. Go ahead.
We've been in talks, Steve and I, over the past year about making the new Grim Reaper album. And this certainly isn't the way that any of us predicted that we'd get to meet up, I dare say, in this awful circumstance. All I can say is that I cannot believe how stoic he's been given what's happened to him. I mean, it's just, I know because I was in a similar position when I was in my coma a few years ago. Apparently, my leg was going cold and there was fears that they'd have to cut my leg off because of thrombosis due to the machines that they had me plumbed into. And that wouldn't have been happening. Thing is, I have the same illness as Steve as well. I'm diabetic, insulin, all that, and I really feel for what's happened to him. And as soon as I heard what had gone down, it was like, I just can't believe this. How quickly, you've got a pain in your foot, and then the next thing you know, it's gone the way it has. And I was really, as soon as it happened and he was in hospital, I knew that something had to be done because you can't, in a foreign country on your own, especially when the rest of the band had to be flown back home. His wife wasn't there yet. To be all on your own like that in that dire circumstance, really, it got to everybody. And I am so proud of the metal community, if you want a better word, for jumping in straight ahead. Right, how can we make some money for this situation? And that's what we're doing. And I want Steve to know that this has all been done out of respect, love, whatever you want to say, for our fellow musician, warrior, metalhead, lunatic, whatever. And off we go. I've had the drum tracks sent and a couple of guitars that Glenn Drover's done, and just waiting for the rest of the stuff to come so I can compile it and mix it down.
So let's talk about a little bit of history of Chris Tsangarides.
Yes. Oh my God. Where do we start?
I think we're going to start off with, I know we're short on time, so let's start off right with Anvil Metal on Metal. Alan, do you have any questions for that time period?
We always try to get Anvil into every show that we do. Going back to the day, Metal on Metal, a classic album. Any thoughts of meeting the guys for the first time?
Well, it was quite the meeting. I turned up. It was January in Toronto, freaking cold, snow, whatever. And they turned up to meet me at the airport with their leather jackets and T-shirts. It was like, okay, whatever. I've got, God knows what I was wearing, but, I wasn't going to get cold. But straight from the get-go, it was like obvious we're all the same blooming thing, music. They were up for trying any weird and wonderful suggestion I had. And that's kind of how we did it. We ended up doing the guitars in a corridor that was outside of the studio of phase one. It was some office building next door. And there was an interconnecting door with this massive, great big, it must have been 100 foot long, this corridor, possibly about 6 feet wide, and glass all the way down it. and we put his amps on one end and put microphones the other end. But we had to do it after 6 o'clock when they'd all gone home. Sort of sneak in and set up this stuff. And luckily, there wasn't anybody ever doing overtime in that place, because they would have got a bit of a shock with lips cranking them up. But that's kind of, it got the sound there, and nothing much had changed. We went back to phase one, I think it was 2011, something like that, or 10, for re-records of the original material for the soundtrack album of the film.
Yes.
Yeah, we had to redo them because, long story, the people that owned the rights to them wouldn't release them for the movie after they saw how well it was doing. They wanted huge amounts of money for the use of. So we said, you know what, let's go redo them and screw them. And that's what we did. And it was quite interesting to see, because the studio was exactly the same, except the desk had grown twice the size. I'm going, this wasn't this big when we were, I'm sure, or maybe we were kind of smaller and now we've grown bigger. No, it was, they bought another one and stuck it together. So it was pretty cool. But it really did bring back memories to see that place there like that. But unfortunately, no one was there from the old regime. So it was a little bit different, but nonetheless, it was cool.
Chris, did you think that Metal on Metal was sort of like the beginning of speed metal? I mean, it influenced a whole subgenre.
I don't know, because it was, to me, it was, cool, he can play fast, that's good. But, it was like, I worked with Gary Moore and thought everybody could play guitar like that. At the time, you really don't know. You haven't got a clue. It's only when you can look back and think, you know what? That was the first record that did that. That was the first record that did this, or what. When people ask you what was whatever, you can look back and say, hey, this, or this. So it did have a big influence on people, because there wasn't much of it going on. I mean, when we were recording 666, the track, the Number of the Beast was 666 going on in England exactly the same time Maiden were recording theirs. Now, how, what's the word? 7 degrees of separation, or 6 degree, whatever it is. My goodness me. And their version or their song or whatever clearly appealed to a lot more people than our one. And so they sold more and became what they did. But then, as you see in the movie, you see people being interviewed about them and giving their honest opinions and coming out with, hey, we used to play their albums and this, that, and the other. I mean, I know that Lars had gone into Johnny Z's office with a copy of Metal on Metal and said, that's who we want to do our album. And he said, oh, no, it'd be too expensive. And it was like, what? No one asked me. How did they know what I was getting paid, But, so who knows what it could have been had I done that, the first Metallica album. Yeah. It interests me, because I don't know, would it have come out like, I'm sure it wouldn't have come out like that, like they put it out. It would have been whatever flavor I would have sort of sprinkled on it. But it always fascinates me. What would it have been?
So let's talk about Painkiller. Judas Priest. Probably within the metal community, I think they've nominated, at least in the top 10, Painkiller, right? Would you say?
Oh, it was their huge comeback album. It was considered at that point.
So what was the good and bad going on in the studio? Rob left after the album. I mean, any inclinations? Did you feel that he wasn't happy? What was going on?
Well, it was all good fun and frolics. I took them to they didn't want to record in the States, and they couldn't record in the UK for various reasons. So they wanted to go somewhere that was kind of close to home, but not obviously. So I knew a studio in the south of France called Miraval, which was owned by the jazz pianist Jacques Lussier. And I'd been there before recording Rock Goddess there and Lords of the New Church. Loved the place. It was the most amazing buildings. Had its own vineyard and its own wine, so that was a good enough reason anyway. But south of France, in Provence, fantastic. And yeah, they liked the idea of that, so we hoofed up there and we were all staying. It was like a hamlet. There were various buildings around the estate. It's now belongs to Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie. Become their French connection, if you like. It was a bit more as a pity, but it was a fantastic studio, and the people were really nice, and the food was even better, and the wine was even better than that. And we, oh my goodness me, the laughs that were had on that record, because they've always been a bit, quick with the old prank, and what we'd get up to at Morgan Studios when we were doing Sad Wings of Destiny was no one's business, chucking food off the roof at unsuspecting people walking by on their way home, and suddenly this great big curry would land on their heads, which was very funny to us. Not really, but I mean, for goodness sake. But apart from chucking food at people, the studio in France was just amazing. If you'd seen it, it was the history goes back to Knights Templar, and in the producer gets to stay in the old chapel, and it's exactly what it is, an old chapel with rooms to the side of it, and that's right next to this Saracen burial yard with all manner of ghosties and spooks walking about, apparently. Not that I ever saw any, but all that kind of, I don't know, nights and things is a bit metal, isn't it? And it would be, come on, lads, time to be metal. And right, okie dokie, so in we'd go and be metal. And it don't get any more metal than that, is my opinion. And it was blooming marvellous. 9 weeks we were there, absolutely wonderful. I don't remember a single argument.
You're in the studio with Rob now.
Yeah.
And you're talking about the vocal lines, and probably is the most head voice falsetto that he used probably in any of the Priest catalog. Whose idea was that to really go that high?
Well, it's him. That's how he does it, and egged on by yours truly here, because in the song Painkiller, where he's singing pain, pain, killer, killer, when it's getting all intense, the production note to Rob was, can you sound like a Dalek from the Doctor Who series? Exterminate, exterminate. And they used to just get more and more intense till they blew up. And he went, I get you. And that was exactly what he did.
And did you sense, and again, I asked this question before, did you sense him not being happy in the band?
No, they were very happy. It was all there.
I mean, he left after Painkiller. There must have been.
Well, he left after Painkiller. I don't know why. Well, I do. He wanted to go down the Pantera route. He was saying we should sound more like Pantera, and I'm saying, well, they're trying to sound like you. What's the matter with you? Because that's what happens. The artistes get to wherever they are, and they listen to some new, fresh whatever, and it's like, oh, it sounds, I don't know, heavier. What are you going to say? It sounds different to them, and they want to be like that because they think that's the happening thing. So they don't realise that they are them. They could fart on a blooming down a microphone and put a drum beat to it, and it'd still get bought, and people would try to copy it. I said, you are Judas Priest, and Judas Priest do whatever they do. You don't want to be Judas Priest sings Pantera, for goodness sake, or anybody else. Be yourselves, do your thing. We're fine, And I mean, I wasn't around to see, the nonsense when he left. I heard about it through, various channels. But when I met up with Glenn a few years later to, write some tunes with him on the Demolition record, the things I heard from his side were pretty horrendous. But, you know, they were, in a band that had been going for so long, established itself together. That unit was as strong as it could be. Individually, both suffered. As far as sales and everything else, nobody wanted to see the amount of people that were there didn't warrant the stature of where they had achieved. They were going downhill rapidly, both of them, no matter what they'd sold. When they got back together again, it was like, there you see, there you go, that's what we want to see. But I mean, I don't know, the fact that KK left after all these years as well is, what on earth happened there?
There's so many albums you've done. Maybe we'll just throw out some names and some titles for you. You could just
see how good my memory is.
That will test you. Let's start with one of my favorites of all time, Thin Lizzy and the Renegade album.
Sure. Well, that was I'd not long done Gary Moore's solo stuff, and that's where I met Phil Lynott, and because I also was working backwards and forwards, sometimes on the sessions that we had with Gary, sometimes would be working on Phil's solo albums, Fanatical Fascists. That's the song. Solo in Soho was his the first one, and the next one was Fatalistic Attitudes. There's a mouthful. And I got to record the 2 tunes that he'd written for his daughters. The song Sarah, that was on the Black Rose album, but it started out life as a solo record, and it's Mark Nassif playing the drums, and it's Huey Lewis from Huey Lewis and the News playing the harmonicas on there. And I was so baffled that next thing you know, it comes out on the Black Rose record. There's a Thin Lizzy song. But so there was lots of intertwining. You didn't know one day what you were doing, where it would end up. They were just recording stuff. And then come to Renegade, and they'd recorded a few tracks, but I was asked because he'd lost his way, if you like. He was, just didn't know, the directions were just all over the place. And he needed somebody to focus him and get the stuff going. And that's what I did. I came in and recorded from scratch Angel of Death. Funny that, all the heavy shit I get to do. Yes. And Pressure Will Blow, and the song Renegade itself. And it came out, they went on tour, they had Snowy in the band, and it wasn't quite doing it. And he asked me honestly to give my opinion, what I thought of the band as it was. But after we'd seen some video footage of them doing the Dominion Theatre in London with Snowy, that lineup, the Renegade lineup. And I said to him, I love Snowy. I think he's a brilliant guitar player, but he doesn't look like he wants to be there. And he agreed, and do you know anybody? And unfortunately, I did, and enter Mr. Sykes. And that carried on. We went over to, where was it? Ireland. That's right, the first time we did a single for John Sykes called...
Baby, Please Don't Go.
That's the one. Short-term memory, I tell you, is appalling. And we did that, and he got to see who he was and what he was, and there you go, natural step to get him in, and he was in the lineup that did the Thunder and Lightning record. But the Renegade album, now, to me, I think is brilliant. The songs on there are just superb. There's just something about it, and it's one of those things that, it was neither... a specific genre. It wasn't kind of, the songs were all manner of tunes. It didn't matter, and that's where some of it I think was intended for solo work, and some was Lizzy, and it just got all a bit confused. But by the time we did Thunder and Lightning, that became focused. I mean, we were in a studio, and I said to them, why are we, when we were doing Thunder and Lightning, we'd done a few songs, and where's the rest of the material? Oh, we need to write some. And I said, well, why are we sitting in here paying like $2,000 a day when we go to rehearsal place? And Phil thought that was absolutely genius.
Let's go to the next one. Tragically Hip. In Canada, Gord Downey diagnosed with a brain tumor.
I know.
Sad, very sad news.
Very sad news.
You produced probably one of the biggest albums, fully, completely by the Tragically Hip. So
Yes, I did.
for non-Canadians, it's a non-issue, but for Canadians, it's sort of like snow. I mean, it's just Tragically Hip and snow and maple syrup. I mean, it's just Canadian. So, I mean, quickly about your experience and, maybe some thoughts on what Gordy's going through today.
I absolutely love the guys. I was asked to do this record, and it was on the strength of them liking Concrete Blonde and Lizzy and whoever else that I had done. And they brought me over to Toronto, put on a gig in a club, and specifically for me to see them. Now, clubs in Toronto and clubs in England are a bit different. Like, Canadian was about 50 times the size. So there was a sizable crowd in this place. And there they were on this stage, little gear. I'm going, okay, off you go, lads. And off they went. And my goodness me, by the end of it, I was just like, whoa. The intensity, the feeling that they were portraying, it was just brilliant. I thought, yeah, we're doing it. Come on, off you go. And brought them back to London and went into Battery Studios. And it was only 6 weeks to mix it, record it. Then they went home and left me to mix. And the A&R guy was a chap called Bruce Dickinson, but not that one, from New York. And he came over to listen to the tracks. And I played him the first one. And he went, oh man, that was fantastic. He said, can I hear it on the small speakers? And I looked at him like, that was the small speakers. What do you mean? No, it wasn't. Was it? I said, no, this is the big ones. Turned it on to them, blew his wig off. No, let's go eat. That was it. End of A&R meeting. He loved it, and it was because the tunes were, I don't know, they happened on some really good, the feeling of the nation, if you like. The songs that they had written struck a note with everybody. And it just sold and sold and sold. And what's more, I'm really peed off with the Canadians because I never got a Juno.
Because I wasn't Canadian.
Oh,
Can you believe that?
Me and Al are going to file a complaint right after this show.
Check this out. And also,
shame on Canada.
Matt Langer never got one for doing Bryan Adams' album either because he wasn't Canadian. And I thought, what? Can you imagine, the Grammys, you can't get one because you're not American. So it really baffled me, that did. Couldn't understand, but never mind, because it just sold and sold and sold and sold and keeps doing it, and to have a Diamond Award is something, just blew my mind, I'd heard of them, but I'd never seen one, and one with my blooming name on it, and spelled correctly. How about that? That's even more. Yeah, but I mean, they were, it was just amazing, and it was great fun working with those guys. It was funny because it was the days of the video, and because they were on MCA, which happened to be Universal, the office in London had all their films on videotape, so we got just everything sent down to the studio, and we're just watching all these movies all the time. I can't remember when we actually recorded the blooming thing, but we must have done. Somebody did,
Any projects you're working on now, or any bands that are exciting you these days?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm in the middle. I suppose it's the middle. Yeah, finished the vocals of the UFO record, the covers album coming out. But I'm also today I'm working with a band from Norway called Hex AD, which is pretty blooming heavy duty music, I'll tell you. But it's great. It's not what would you call it? It's incredibly musical, but it's like, I don't know, Black Sabbath at half speed, you know. That's yeah. No, it's phenomenal. The sounds that we've been getting, and it's just I really quite like it because it's quite proggy as well. Cool time signatures and whatnot. So it's kind of a hybrid, I guess. But that's one thing. And then there's a band coming over from Israel next. A doom band, if you will, from the Holy Land. That should be pretty cool. And I'm in the middle of also Leatherwolf.
Leatherwolf.
Mixing those guys. And what else is going on? Yeah, then there's a band from Germany called King's Call that are coming in April. And a new project in May with Roland Grappow and Mike Tirana, called Crayson from the band. It used to be Masterplan and Halloween, Roland. So this is a new kind of European power metal band, if you like. So that should be fun.
And your
And
thoughts?
and also my band, More. We're I don't know, but fit all this time in to do it, but we're currently getting nearly finished on this new album that we've been doing, and it's blooming good, I have to say. It's very new wave of British heavy metal, and the tunes that I've come up with a very new wave of British heavy metal, and no matter what I do, it always ends up like that. And I think, well, there you go.
The role of a producer from that era to today.
Yeah, oh boy.
How has it changed?
A producer back then is what it should be now. Somebody that would take hold of an artist, band, whatever they were, and make sure that the songs were fit for purpose. So before you went into a studio, it'd be normally the producer's choice where they would go, and they would be given a budget, and you would have to make all that work. And if it was, you go over budget, you get yelled at, whatever. But that's kind of how it was in that respect. And there was a method to everything. Now there is no method to anything. Anything goes. Buy a computer. Oh, I'm a producer. Well, mate, I tell you, what you have to go through before you realise what it is that you're doing and how to achieve what it is that you've got in your head, or what the band, more importantly, have got in their heads, and you have to interpret that. No bedroom will ever, do the same thing as a real studio. Professional people, professional engineers, because everybody in the heyday was a pro at what they did. And so you would go to the best mastering engineer, you would go to the best studio, etc., etc. Unfortunately, now in the metal world, there's no budgets for anything, and it's sad because they're missing out on a whole way of doing it. People still ask, how come those records sound better than what we're doing? And where do you begin to explain to them? Well, that's because you're sat in a bedroom with a machine and not in a dirty great big studio with beautiful vintage mics and somebody that knows what they're doing. Right. Quite frankly,
Again, we're out of time here. We know your time's precious. Appreciate that. We could go on for hours, I'm sure. I really appreciate it.
Another time, we'll organise another one.
Sure.
No problem.
Yeah.
That's great news.
Well, there you have it. Chris Tsangarides. Famous. We'll call him famous. Legendary.
Producing.
Can we say that? Legendary producer, yes. Famous producer. Thank you for being on the show on the Metal Voice. And Alan, anything else?
Thank you, man. Thank you, guys.
We'll definitely do this again.
All right. Have yourself a great night.